With me is Jill Rutter from the Institute for Government and Anna Menon from the research group UK Interchanging Europe. Welcome to you both. I don't know about you, I watched PMQs this afternoon and Theresa May struggling on with her voice and Jeremy Corbyn. I didn't detect any mood for compromise, even after the vote last night.
I think there's a very interesting contrast from that with what the Chancellor said at the end of his spring statement, which I thought the spring statement was quite a non-event in many ways. But at the end, the Chancellor seemed to suggest that tomorrow might be the start of a process of trying to reach some sort of compromise. And really interestingly, that then seemed to be picked up in the opening of the debate when Michael Gove was standing in for the Prime Minister and she finally gave up on her voice. So whether that's a sign of a split disagreement between Hammond and Gove and the Prime Minister, I'm not quite sure, but it did sound then as though the government was actually thinking maybe we do finally have to take the initiative and see where there is a majority for something in the House of Commons.
People might scream at the television and say, why won't she compromise on this deal, Anna? But of course the problem she has is that if she reaches across the aisle and tries to do something with Labour, she risks losing half her party.
Yeah, I think there is a real danger that for every Labour vote she gains by moving towards a customs union, she loses a Conservative. But also, viewed from the Tory front bench, compromise means something rather different, doesn't it? Which is, why doesn't Jeremy Corbyn compromise? Because what people on the Tory front bench would say is essentially our deal with the backstop is very, very close indeed to what Jeremy Corbyn seems to be calling for. If the Labour Party would recognise that, we'd have something to work with. So both sides are in favour of compromise, but both sides are in favour of the other side compromising first.
That was the real head-scratcher for me yesterday, is that Keir Starmer stood up and said, you see, the legal text from the Attorney General says we're going to be trapped in a customs union permanently. And I thought, well, isn't that what Labour actually wants?
Absolutely.
That's been the really interesting debate throughout, and it's actually one of the reasons it's all quite frustrating, because the people actually, and slightly bizarrely as Anand says, who are closest to the government's position is the official position of the Labour Party. The political declaration doesn't give them quite what they want, but as the Prime Minister said, it's compatible with the spectrum of options. What they really, of course, don't want is the Prime Minister being the Prime Minister when we move into those discussions on the future relationship. But Labour doesn't have a substantive problem at all with the withdrawal agreement, and you could say if they're really worried about what they call a jobs first Brexit, the sort of uncertainty, the downgrading of the economic forecast we've seen from the Chancellor today should be making them think twice about actually playing the right game.
They're actually both putting party before country, to put it bluntly.
Neither wants to move,
Yeah. Let's talk about the Malthouse Compromise, or Malthouse Compromise B, as it's now called. It seems to me that one tenet of this is to buy transition. And there may be a majority that backs this tonight, a majority of the Conservative MPs, but I was under the impression Michel Barnier had ruled out the buying of any transition.
Well, look, I'm quite cynical about the Malthouse Compromise. I think that the sole purpose for it is to make Conservative MPs feel good, feel united. Actually, there was some evidence of this after the Brady Amendment last time. The Malthouse group came together, you saw different wings of the Conservative Party talking together in the same room, and it bred a greater sense of unity than had been there before. I think this is all about party politics, because you're absolutely right. The European Union not just won't give us a transition without the withdrawal agreement, but arguably can't give us a transition without the withdrawal agreement, because they've got no legal basis to do it on.
Last week, Michel Barnier was saying, we will always talk to the UK government, our door is open to discuss. Are they moving to a position where they're now saying, look, if we close down the negotiation, maybe we can focus attention here in Westminster? Do you get there's been a subtle change over now, or maybe not even a subtle change?
I think they're clearly quite frustrated because they presumably thought that by Monday night they had something, they'd given the Prime Minister something, said they wouldn't move, appeared to have moved a bit, given the Prime Minister something that she probably assured them would then make her deal pass. That was then torpedoed effectively yesterday morning by the Attorney General's legal advice, which meant that any, the ERGers who might have been tempted to go across, some of them, of course, did cross and go into the eye lobby this time round, but it basically sort of pulled the rug under that approach. So I think that's why you keep on hearing saying actually the solution's not in Brussels anymore, the solution's in London. What Brussels might try to do, and I haven't heard what you've heard from the European Parliament, but what Brussels might try to do is when it's asked for an extension, if we get no deal taken off the table, at least for the 29th of March tonight, and then get Parliament voting for an extension tomorrow, it might start laying down some sort of conditions, because I don't think the EU is at all keen that the next 3 months look like the last 3 months.
I did make that suggestion, that they say, OK, you can have your shorter extension, but it's either this deal or you revoke Article 50. They could crystallise the choice for the House of Commons.
That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to give us the extension, and then during that extension say, this is absolutely it, unless the alternative at the end of this is either you sign the deal, you have a general election, or you have a referendum. So they could crystallise the choice early on, or they could crystallise the choice later on. But I think either way, if we're working towards a new deadline of the 23rd of May, I think that will be crunch time, and that will finally be a meaningful vote that is meaningful, because there might not be any scope to extend.
I just want to read you something that Guy Verhofstadt, who leads the Brexit Steering Committee in the EU Parliament, tweeted today. European elections will be hijacked by Brexiteers and Brexit issues. Britain should not take part in EU elections in any circumstances, whether in May or at a later date with a longer extension.
Well, then there is a question, I think, for the people who think that actually the UK does need a longer extension, of is there some way round the UK taking part? That is probably the one thing on which the government, the opposition and Guy Verhofstadt absolutely agree, that I think there's absolutely zero appetite here. Yvette Cooper said that on Monday. Zero appetite for taking part in those elections. So the question is there a workaround by extending the terms of people like Nigel Farage, our existing set of MEPs, nominating people from national parliaments? The EU has found ways before for accession states to actually send people to the European Parliament without having elections. Is there a way in which they can get round this, or is that actually the sort of...
But what would your voting rights be? If would you be B-listers in the Parliament? How would it work?
No, you could still be there. You wouldn't get any significant committee chairmanships or anything like that, but you could imagine that we were still there.
You'd still be voting?
Yeah.
I mean, it strikes me there are several things. One, it's not up to Guy Verhofstadt, because if we are a member state, we have the elections.
Yeah.
Two, if we don't have the elections, the first thing I suspect that will happen is Nigel Farage, beautifully ironically, will take a case to the European Court of Justice about having had his democratic rights taken away from him, because we're in the European Union, we should have the elections. And the third thing is, Verhofstadt's comments go both ways, because I think the danger for the EU, if they were thinking about refusing us an extension, is that the European elections in the north of France, in Amsterdam and in Belgium might be dominated by Brexit, because a no-deal Brexit would affect those regions badly, and they're all regions where the populists might seek to prey upon this. And so I think it's in the EU's interests not to have a no-deal outcome before they've had the European Parliament elections.
Fascinating. So many different questions about where we go from here. Anna Menangel, thank you very much indeed.